Hello. What did you read last month? I read too much. So 2024 is supposed to be the year of fun for me, just me doing all sorts of things. So reading is something I've always enjoyed since childhood, so getting back into reading was like the first thing I should focus on. I went a little overboard. Life was a little crazy at the beginning of the year, so April was really the start of me actually enjoying my time, and I spent a lot of time reading, and I don't regret it, but 17 different books and a collection of stories that amounts to an 18th book was a little too much reading. But I just want to talk a little bit about each of the titles I read in April, and I want to start with the books I enjoyed the most. So let's begin with The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This is a popular book, it seems, and deservedly so. It's really well written. It's a thick book. There's lots of emotional ups and downs, and it gets pretty dark at times. So there's some things I was just dreading, no, I don't want to go back to France where everything is dreary. No, not poverty in medieval France. But yeah, and we had lows, but we also had some highs. There's a very sweet love story in there, even though it gets tragic, because of course it has to be tragic. But really, the ending is deeply satisfying. I'm very glad that they made a twist that you would not see coming. Things get pretty wild and kind of leaves it open to a sequel, which would be pretty insane. But I'm just looking forward to a movie adaptation for this. That would be really fun. Anyway, next on the list is A Song for the Wild Built, and the sequel, A Prayer for the Crowned Shy. So these are two books in the series called Monk and Robot. So I would hope this becomes at least a trilogy. We'll see. Just gotta be patient. Let the author do her magic, and she'll get around to it when the time is right. But as it stands, this series is a beautiful little story. These are short and sweet books. So it's about a person and a robot becoming best friends. So this is a utopian alien, but humans, alien socialist utopian society on a moon that humans occupied at some point, apparently. And the robots became sentient, and they went off into the wilderness because they was like, we don't want to just be slaves. So our main character is the first human to see a robot in a very long time, and it's a big deal. But it's also like this future society is rustic. Everything is all sustainable. They still have they have computers that last. It's not a bunch of junk, It's very sweet. It's a very sweet story, just about friendship. But also, the main character Dex goes through a little internal turmoil. Just that thing I think a lot of people around our age, late 20s to early 30s, go through a little bit of a strife, trying to figure out how to make this life you're living worthwhile, if that makes sense. So we get a little bit of that, and that adds a little bit of dramatic tension at times, but for the most part, it's a very relaxing, sipping some tea, listen to this audiobook and sip some tea kind of affair. Highly recommend. So next on the list is The Sirens of Titan. So I actually read this as part of a collection of Kurt Vonnegut's work from 1950 to 1962. So this was the best of the lot, and I also should say that it was actually Kurt Vonnegut's favorite book of all his books. I think he's, if I remember correctly, it was like, this was like a natural birth child. The book came out quickly and easily, something like that. Not exactly those words. But yeah, the Sire of the Titan, it's the gist of the story is, wow, humans are very tiny and insignificant in this great big universe. So if that sounds like a Debbie Downer, it might not be the book for you. It was a little hard to get into the book because the protagonist is not someone you'd want to root for, but that's kind of the point. Like, the further you get into the book, the more it builds upon this narrative and how everything is a big orchestrated tragedy, but also humans don't mean very much. Anyway, on to the next one. So I read Starbucked, a double tall tale of caffeine, commerce, and culture. So I picked this book up based off the strength of the title alone. No, but seriously, I thought that's gotta be a funny book. And also, I don't know about like the rise of Starbucks. Like, how did it become so powerful and ubiquitous? That's a good idea for a book. And yeah, this was very interesting. It was educational about the business decisions behind Starbucks that made it as great as it is today, and also just the history behind coffee, like coffee getting across the world, becoming the cash crop it is today. So yeah, it has some scathing critiques, and for the most part, it's a comedy, and I enjoyed it. It could be a little, what's the right word? A little too biting at times. I don't know if that's the right word, but some people might find that a little off-putting. But at the end of the day, if you don't mind like a roasting sort of comedy type thing, it's pretty funny. Don't take it too seriously. And next on the list is The Piano Player. So this was Kurt Vonnegut's first full-length novel, and it's in part based on his experience working for, I believe, General Motors back in the day. And the one thing about this book is it feels very 1950s, like especially the gender dynamics going on here. So this is like a 1950s dystopian America where machines have replaced people in regards to the vast majority of jobs. So our main character is a engineer turned manager, just climbing the echelon of the worthwhile jobs in his career path. Like, the machines also decide what jobs you can do, and everything is very IQ based and a test to determine your proficiency in this subject and that subject, including how creative you are. So it's like, really, the machines cannot be that right about everything. But yeah, so our main character is becoming increasingly disillusioned with he's on a path to greatness, like, just because of his father having been at the highest level that you can get as a engineer turned manager. Like, I don't even know. I don't want to explain how this society works. I don't really remember. But yeah, he's on the fence about whether he wants to continue down this path of like greater money and prestige, or if he wants to try to get out of this somehow, or if he's just hoping for society as a whole to change. But he's got to be like rooting for the rebels in that case. So a lot happens in this book, and really the end, I don't know if I want to say it's satisfying. It ends, but not really. I'll leave it at that. On to the next one, Legion, The Many Lives of Stephen Leeds. So I picked this book up because I recognized the author, Brandon Sanderson, as like this famous sci-fi writer, and I was like, I looked at the thickness of all these books, and I know like he makes like those thick books that are part of like long series. But the Legion, little novella, I was like, I'll start with this one instead of these big thick books, like big thick Harry Potter. Yeah, so I did not know at the time that it was part of a trilogy, but still, like, all three novellas are still like short and sweet, easy to read through. And it's about this guy who has a mental illness that it's like he's a bit of a medical marvel. So he's a genius, but in order to access this wealth of knowledge, he must compartmentalize this knowledge and like impart it onto personified aspects of his personality, maybe. Yeah, it's like it's a part of him, but these like aspects, as he calls them, are like very different from him. So it calls to question like when you toe in the line between sanity and, oh, I shouldn't say that. When mental illness will impact you, and how, you know, those stories where a mental illness becomes a superpower. So it's kind of delving into that, where Stephen is a detective. He uses his genius to solve impossible cases, and he's super rich because of that, so he can afford to have dozens of rooms for all his different aspects to live in his imagination, but they're physical rooms. It's a lot. It's a lot to take in. I enjoyed the book for sure, but I would say volume one, I felt like the ending of the novella was rushed, so I did not appreciate that. But that wasn't really an issue in parts 2 and 3. Part 3 really tied everything up into a pretty neat bow, so that was nice. It gets pretty dark at times, though. Just be aware of that. And next on the list is Preschooled. So I bought this book last year because I was binge listening through a podcast, and they had the author on, and they were just talking it up like, oh, they love this book. It was funny. So it was a parenting podcast, and this is a book about parenting. It's like a comedy, though. You really shouldn't take it too seriously. There's plenty of caricatures in here and exaggerated personalities for sure, but you get to follow along with 3 different characters. You got a stay-at-home dad that's trying to get his comedy writer career to take off, so like trying to balance those 2 things. And you got a stay-at-home mom that's used to be a lawyer, married to a lawyer husband. And you have the owner of this prestigious preschool. He's like a low-key my favorite character, but she is a lot. She's very demanding, a little controlling, a lot of controlling. And all these characters are going through a struggle. I don't think I need to say that much about this. It's a ride, and I like the way everything came to a satisfying conclusion. Everybody gets a happy ending, I will say that. I loved especially the way Margaret's story ended, because that was like the bleakest one throughout, but she ended up with the best ending somehow. Anyways, on to the next one, The Intelligent Asset Allocator. So this was a book I picked up because I've learning more about finances is a big thing on my mind as of late, but I've read enough online to have absorbed a lot of the information that's imparted in this book. But I would highly recommend this as a great introduction for people to make investing not seem so wild and crazy. Like, if you are like diversified in your asset allocation, like that's gonna help even out the bumps along the road. So yeah, I would recommend this to anybody who wants to learn more about investing. This is a good place to start. And next on the list, The Cheapskate Next Door. So I actually picked up this book because I recognized the author. I read his first book, which is referenced in this second book. It's like, if the first book didn't happen, he wouldn't have been able to make this second book. This is just him traveling around the country for his book tour, and he decided to do it the cheapskate way, and along the way he met with a bunch of other cheapskates and learned about all the different ways you can be a cheapskate. It's a comedy, but it's also like it's meant to be a call to action, but really it's gonna just preach into the choir, and I don't mind that at all. I appreciate the environmentalist message that the author wants to get across, and I appreciate his sense of humor. So, on to the next one. How the Bond Market Works. So, another book about finances. So, this kind of ties into stuff I read online that goes back on the intelligent asset allocator. And so, there's this trend of people that just want to go 100% all in on stocks, like maximum returns. Bonds are useless. No, there's a place for bonds. There's definitely a place for bonds. There's a place for a wider variety of assets than stocks and bonds too. But yeah, so learning about bonds was a thing. I wanted to just get that knowledge in. This is like a very textbook style of reading, so it imparted a lot of knowledge and went into a lot of detail, but it was explained at like an introductory course level. So yeah, it was pretty good. I learned a lot, and there's stuff that it went like too far into the weeds for me to really take anything away from, but I'm glad I picked up that book. All right, next on the list is Mother Night. So this was my least favorite of the novels in that Kurt Vonnegut collection. I guess the lack of character arcs, I think that was the main thing that was the downside for me, because I'm a real character-driven kind of person. I like to have someone to root for, if not just to see a journey, but you could say the main character becomes increasingly insane. Yeah, there wasn't really a person to root for in the situations. Like, the people that were on the main character's side were scummy, and the people that were going after the main character were being too harsh about it. Like, they could have had a far more balanced approach. So, wasn't really rooting for people in this. This is a World War II era Nazi Germany based sort of story, so it gets into some heavy topics for sure. So the gist of it is the main character was born in the States, left when he was like early teenager, tweens maybe, and so his father had a job in Germany, and he stayed in Germany, married a German wife, and became a German playwright and also a radio host that sent propaganda Nazi messages to the United States through his radio. And he was also a spy, covert spy, Nazi madness. This book is madness. Yeah, if you're gonna binge Kurt Vonnegut, you gotta read every novel. I think, well, I'll have to read more of his works to know for sure, but this is probably going to be at the bottom, like, not something I'd want to revisit. On to the next one, The Millionaire Next Door. So, I picked this book up because it gets mentioned so much in, like, personal finance spaces, so I heard about it enough and I needed to read it for myself, and yeah, I'm glad I read it. I appreciate that the authors backed up a lot of their what they had to say with the studies they've done on the topic of like how people amass wealth, and how if you want to be a prodigious accumulator of wealth, how you should manage your finances appropriately, and especially with like stuff related to raising your kids and imparting your wealth onto the next generation. So it was interesting at times, but it was also like it's still a lot of anecdotal data, and I'm not super interested in the idea of being really wealthy. I want to have enough. So, like, enough for me shouldn't be that much money. I don't want to take up too much capital, if that makes sense. But if I do manage to amass a lot of wealth, I'd probably end up being a small time philanthropist. This is a book worth reading if you're not super familiar with the whole concept of using frugality as a means to amassing wealth. And next on the list, the final book, whew, lots of books to cover, is, so the last book I read was Dickens Land, and I should not have read this book. So I've read 0 Dickens novels, so I don't know why I thought it was a good idea for me to pick up this book that talks about Dickens fans bringing his stories into the real world. So it had a lot of references to Dickens novels that I did not read. Like, I only knew about some of it based on seeing a couple film adaptations, and it goes into like some like supreme detail on things at times where it seems a little too clinical, so that made it a little hard to read at times. But other times it was nice where it's just fun to no, I shouldn't say fun, it's kind of just like a little wild to see how much people will blend the fantasy and reality, and just like these fictional characters become real people somehow. Like, people, why? But it happens. I knew it happened before this book, but Dickens was like one of those first big names, like after Shakespeare's era. Like, Dickens is one of those big names that built such a fan base that would end up acting in odd ways like that. But really, it's just a story about all the like tourist sorts of locations that were inspired by Dickens or purported to be a location that inspired Dickens. So yeah, if you're a Dickens fan, you should read this, but since I didn't read any Dickens, I really shouldn't have read that. All right, and the last thing I need to talk about is the like short stories that were in that Kurt Vonnegut collection. It had several short stories and a couple essays. So I really enjoyed that essay that referenced like the meditative effects of reading, but he was really emphasizing like back in the time when he was a kid that short stories in magazines was like a big form of entertainment, maybe the primary. Like, magazines were a big deal, and then a good entertainment source was the fiction, those short fiction stories you'd get in magazines. It's so funny to me. Cosmopolitan, like, Kurt actually published a lot of stories in Cosmopolitan before it became what it is today. It used to be a more serious magazine. Anyway, he really emphasized that short stories, like, and because they were so easy to, like, just you get home from a tough day, sit down and read a little story, and that'll reset you and then fix your mood up a little bit. I never thought about the power of short stories in particular, but like just the power and meditative effect of reading is why I want to get back into reading in general. So I really appreciated Kurt speaking to that. And it made me look back in the day, like before TV ruined everything, how some things were better. I don't usually say that about back in the day, but yeah, one of those things that was pretty sweet. So, the short stories from 1950 to 1962. I'm just gonna talk about my favorite and least favorites, I guess, suppose. So, one of my favorites would be Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, also known as The Big Trip Up Yonder. So this is like a theoretical future where there's no more aging. We've developed a drug that stops people from aging, and we're living to almost 200 because people die when they decide they've had enough. And old people are still like, nah, I'll stay around. So overpopulation becomes the concern. Not enough food, like there's so the whole thing, the story is about this grandpa who's like ruling the apartment with an iron fist. It's a funny premise, and I like that it doesn't take itself too seriously, but the world it's painting is like I can poke holes in it, but I still think it was amusing, especially the way it ended. All right, and not so funny, more on the darker end of things is 2BR02B, or pronounced to be or not to be. This is another case of overpopulation being the concern. Well, it's like they've solved overpopulation by limiting the amount of births to the amount of deaths. So every time you want to bring a child into this world, you have to find someone to sign off on killing themselves or going to a facility that will kill them. It's dark, it's bleak, and the ending is darker and bleaker than the premise. I enjoyed it. So, on the not so good end of things, we have the Harrison Bergeron story. So, like, this got a little too out there for me. Even the premise is too much. It's like there's a society where, in order to make everyone equal, people who have natural advantages are handicapped in like aggressive ways. It's like painful in a lot of cases. So no one can be smart, no one can be beautiful, no one can be this or that, but the titular Harrison Bergeron is like all of those great things, and he must take all these extreme handicaps, and it gets crazy. I didn't enjoy it. Even the premise was too out there for me. Like, people agreeing to this is very unbelievable. And another one I didn't really enjoy was Epicac. Or should it be EPICAC? So the premise is about this guy is using this highly intelligent computer to write poems for this fellow mathematician lady he is infatuated with. She's like not feeling him, but these poems from this robot are like the or what get her to change her mind. And the robot, yeah, there's like some AI love shenanigans. I guess the thing I have to say about this is it's like just rough around the edges. It's like I'd rather just watch something like Her. It's a better representation of this story. Like, you can only do so much in a short story, but since I've seen this explored in more depth, didn't get much out of it. So, okay, so this was too long of a video. Probably just dragged out the end there, getting a little fatigued. Yeah, I read too much in April. I'm gonna read less in May. I want to really just get into that nice groove and enjoy the meditative benefits of reading. But I'm glad I read all the titles I read for April. If you watched all this, thanks for watching, and what did you read last month? Let me know, and maybe I'll add to my list of things to read. We'll see. I have a mega long list of things to read, but that's all I have to say. Time to end this, and thanks.